forgot that I had this. So what I did, I just went ahead and pulled an earlier presentation out of the package. So if everybody's ready for another round of grounding and bonding. And why? Because you just can't get enough. Okay, so now that I heard that collective groan, even without having everyone's audio, I will tell you that's a joke. I'm just kidding. I wouldn't do that. Plus, I don't have the technical expertise to go ahead and do grounding and bonding because we've got some really smart folks in our group that handle that for us. What I do have is the people of ham radio, and I've been thinking for a long time about some of the people that made our hobby possible for us, and those early scientists, those early physicists who made these discoveries and passed them along so that we could do the things that we do today. So one of the guys I thought about was Joseph Henry. So Joseph Henry was born in Albany, New York, back in 1797. He was, this is fairly recent after the founding of our new nation. There was still lots of turmoil and chaos, but he proceeded forward with a lot of great things during his life. And he made it 90 years to 1878. So Joseph Henry was an American physicist, but a lot of his work was based on the work of Heinrich Hertz, whose work was based on that of James Clerk Maxwell. James Clerk Maxwell being from Scotland and Heinrich Hertz being from Germany. Some of the big discoveries that were involved for Hertz were the electromagnet. And one of the things that he discovered while attending school at the Albany University in New York was that rather than insulating the iron core of a magnet, or of the iron core, and then wrapping that iron core with wire, that it was better to leave the core unobstructed and then use insulated wire to wrap around that magnet, creating a stronger magnetic field. So while he was at Yale College, he actually built a magnet that could carry over 1 ton. So one of the things that he wanted to continue working on was the search for electromagnetic self-induction. So in an attempt to make that happen, he began to build an electromagnet at the University of Albany. Unfortunately, there was another scientist who was already using the room that he needed to build his structure. So he wasn't able to build that, and he ended up in a 1-year delay. While he was delayed, Michael Faraday over in the UK discovered that the electromagnetic self-induction. But Hertz resumed his experiments in 1832, and he was the first to notice the principle of self-induction. So basically the creation of electricity using magnets. One of the other things that he did was he contributed to the development of telegraphy. He created a telegraph of his own design and made it work. And he provided Samuel Morse with 5 miles of copper wire to test out his theories and to do some experiments using that. He also wrote to Congress in support of a 50-mile test line of copper so that he and Samuel Morse could go ahead and continue their experimentation and prove their theory of telegraphy and being able to communicate over wire over a long distance. And another thing that he did was he studied sunspots. And one of his big contributions was he proved that sunspots give off less heat than the rest of the solar surface. Now, the article that I read said he used a thermogalvanometer, but when I started trying to find out what on earth a thermogalvanometer was, I kept finding information that said it wasn't developed or patented until I think it was 1900. But this discovery was done before that. So hard for me to know exactly what it was he used to make that determination. But like I said, the article said that it was a thermogalvanometer. But the important thing is he did notice that sunspots give off less heat, and that sunspots make a difference in the things that we do in our radios, in our radio hobby. It looks like I got some slides out of sequence here. So I had the citation up there for just a second, but some key things in Heinrich Hertz's life. He studied at the Albany Academy of New York. He discovered laws related to transformers, for electric transformers. He was named the professor of natural history at the College of New Jersey, which later became Princeton University. And he was the first secretary of the Smithsonian Museum. While at the Smithsonian Museum, he organized a group of volunteer weather observers, which led to the creation of the Weather Bureau. And that information and that study got him to a point where he was assigned as the chief technical advisor to President Lincoln during the Civil War. And this is KC5AMT for ID. He was the primary organizer of the National Academy of Sciences, and he was its second president. And then he was honored after his passing by naming the unit of inductive resistance after him. So there we go. All right, that's for that one. All right, so there's your surprise Halloween picture for the year. Hope everybody enjoys that. So the next person that I want to talk about is Hedley Lamarr. So if you're familiar with Hedley Lamarr gained fame around 1974 in the movie Blazing Saddles. He was an attorney general and an assistant to the governor and the state procurer. Much like many of the people in today's government, he was a very corrupt politician along with the governor, and he wanted to run people off of their property so they could push the railroad through that area. Thankfully, he was thwarted by a do-gooder sheriff. And he says all the time, it's not Hetty, it's Hedley Lamarr. So often his name was confused throughout that movie with the great Hedley Lamarr. Now, guys, that would have been a lot funnier and gotten more laughs if we had all been face to face. So I can't wait to see us get together. Now, this person just totally caught my attention and enthralled me. She is beautiful. She was smart, and she was, well, rich. Now, some of you may even remember Hedley Lamarr because she was probably acting when you were children, but we won't go there. So I will tell you, her name when she was born was Hedwig Eva Keisler. There's supposed to be an L in there. She was born in Vienna, Austria in 1914. So I guess, anyway, and she lived up until January of 2000 here in the United States. Her mom's name was Gertrude, and she was born in 1894, and she lived all the way up until 1977. Hetty was able to bring her mother over to the United States during or just at the beginning of World War II, and she was able to live out her life here. But she was a pianist, and that's one of the things that she taught her daughter. So Hetty's dad was Emil Keisler, and he was a banker. They were there in Vienna, Austria. He was a banker, but he was interested in gadgets. And as he and Hetty would go for their walks and go about different things, he would explain to Hetty how things worked. So, you know, when the streetcar would go by, he would explain to her that, well, the wires above go all the way back to a factory, create electricity, and that's what allows it to move. And Hetty was always interested in gadgets. There's some redundant information in this slide, but Hetty was well off. Her family had plenty of money. They went to the opera, they went to theater. Hetty was taught piano, and she attended private school. And she said in an interview that her favorite subject was chemistry. So let's talk about Hetty's rise to stardom. She started in movies very young, but the movie that was really her breakout role was in a movie called Ecstasy, and she did that at the age of 16. At 19, she married a munitions manufacturer, and the guy was creating bombs and other armaments and selling them to the Germans. So he was very involved with Hitler and the Nazi regime. Although it's believed that Hitler never attended any parties at their home, it is known that Benito Mussolini had gone to their home and attended a party. So she had met him. So that was kind of an interesting thing. seeing the path of where the war was going to be headed, she, well, really it was before the war, but she saw what her husband was like. She didn't like what she saw. He did not treat her well. He was a very jealous person. He kept her under wraps for the most part. So one night she decided it was time for her to escape to London. And what she did, she was responsible for hiring the maids and the service staff there at their home. And she hired someone that looked remarkably like her. So what she did, she gave that maid a sleeping a tea with a sleeping agent in it, and the maid fell asleep. And Hetty went ahead and dressed up as a maid, and then snuck out of the house and rode away and ended up in London. While in London, Hetty was able to meet with Louis B. Mayer of the MGM Studios in Hollywood. So she met him there in London and did an audition, and he offered her $125 a week. She said no thanks and walked out the door. The next thing she did is she booked passage on the same ship that Louis was going to be taking back here to the U.S. And on that ship, she dressed to the nines, put on every bauble she had, and looked drop dead gorgeous as she walked through the dining room right past his table as forks and spoons dropped and hit their plates and men's jaws dropped and hit the table. And at that point, Louis decided he had to have her, offered her $500 a week, and she moved to Hollywood. This KC5 AMT. Her first breakthrough role here in the U.S. was Algiers with Charles Boyer, and she did 35 movies. She has 35 movies to her credit. Later in her career, she actually became a producer and produced 2 of her own movies. So those are a couple of the movies. One of the ones that seems to be the most well-known is the Samson and Delilah movie. So just something to think on. But 35 movies in her career. Now, during her career, she wasn't just acting. She still had a very active mind, and it was said that oftentimes after she would leave the set, or sometimes even between takes, she would go back and play with experiments and had a chemistry lab at home and that kind of stuff. An interesting thing that I read was she started dating Howard Hughes. Was not very impressed at all from what the articles were saying, but they dated for a short time, and he took Hetty to visit the aircraft factory. So Howard Hughes' goal was to build the fastest airplane available and be able to sell it to the Air Force. But one of the things Hetty noticed as she looked at the construction of the aircraft was that the wings were squared off and straight. And she started doing some thinking and did some research, and she bought a book about fish and a book about birds, and realized that in both cases, the bird's wings and the fish's fins were curved and generally set back at kind of an angle. So showing him that, Hughes had the wing design changed, and yes, the planes definitely got faster, and he did win a contract. A couple of lesser known scientific experiments or developments that she worked on. She attempted to develop a better traffic signal system. Now, there wasn't a whole lot of detail about what happened with that or where that went, but that was just one of the things that was mentioned in the article. But then she created an instant fizzy drink cube. Her feeling was that our soldiers all over the world were desperate for a little taste of home. So she created this cube that would fizz and become carbonated when it's dropped in water. She put it all together and everything was going fine, but then she found out that water in different places has different chemicals and minerals and materials in it and doesn't always work the same. And she decided that that was a failed experiment and that really in reality it just tasted like Alka-Seltzer. So let's talk about Hetty's greatest invention. She created a system in which she created a secret communication system. And the plan was to be able to guide torpedoes using radio. So at the time, England was out fighting a war and trying to deal with the German U-boats, and they would launch their torpedoes, but they were notorious for not hitting their target. And it was everything from the the U-boat's ability to maneuver quickly and their ability to jam any kind of signals that might be going back and forth between the ship and the torpedo. She came up with this idea of, well, what if we started hopping frequencies? And this is where things get kind of interesting to me. She got the idea from a Philco remote control that would change the radio station on a console stereo from across the room. And she's thinking, well, if I can change the frequency with this remote control, why can't I do the same thing to a guided missile or to a torpedo? And so she mulled this around in her mind, and she said, well, what if we jumped from frequency to frequency to frequency simultaneously in both? She had no idea how to make this idea come true, but she kept it in her mind. Well, when you find out that you don't have everything you need to make something happen, what do? You find someone that can help you. And she met a guy named George Antheil through a family friend. So George Antheil was born in Trenton, New Jersey, died in New York. He was a composer and a pianist. And his most noted work was La Ballet Mécanique. And no, I could not figure out which buttons to push to put the asterisk or whatever on top of the E and all of that stuff. But anyway, it's French. It was La Ballet Mécanique for piano players, or for player pianos. And he composed it in such a way that it was able to synchronize 16 different pianos at one time. Well, when you put two stars' heads together, you just never know what you're going to come up with. So taking the idea from that Philco box that you see there on the screen, the idea came to Antheil to use piano scrolls, the scrolls that they would use for player pianos. And his theory was, if you could synchronize the two piano scrolls to start at the same time and turn at the same rate, both the ship and the torpedo would be changing frequencies simultaneously and be able to communicate. So even if the Germans were trying to jam a frequency, they wouldn't be able to jam all of the frequencies, and they would be able to continue to guide the torpedo to its target. So the two of them, with some help, drafted up a schematic of how this thing would work. And you can see at the bottom that there's the paper scrolls, or the scrolls that would be, they wouldn't be the size of regular piano scrolls. They would be much smaller, but they would be able to spin, be read by a device, and then transmit or change the channels that everything is transmitting and receiving on. So a really ingenious design, and very neat. So they received their patent from the U.S. Patent Office, and Antheil took that patent and the design work, and he went to the United States Navy, and he tried to show them this. And the Navy brass laughed him out of the office, saying, "What are we doing? Putting player pianos on torpedoes? Get out of here and let us do our job." So he was kind of defeated and dejected. He had bills to pay, didn't have time to continue working on the project. So he went on about his business, and it just sat on the back shelf, and that was it. Later, during the war, all of the patent and design work was confiscated by the alien, now I can't recall the name of it. It was the Alien Bureau, but basically anyone who was an alien to the United States, not a formal citizen, couldn't have anything like this. So they confiscated the patents. The patents ended up being kept. Although she had a copy of it, it never really saw the light of day until much, much later. Now, I didn't continue researching whatever happened to the patent and what happened in the frequency hopping stuff after that. But what I do know is that many of the technologies that we have today are based upon that early concept. Although certainly much more advanced than what they were at that time, they were still the idea of being able to change frequencies simultaneously among radio receivers and radio transmitters so that other people can't figure out or can't intercept an entire message. So that was kind of interesting to me. I found that to be, I was just amazed at the things that this young lady was able to do and how she was able to do stuff. So anyway, that's what I've got there for her. A little bit more about her life. She ended up being married 6 times. She had 3 children, one of which at the age of 12 became estranged to her, and she did not speak to that child for the rest of her life. He was eventually given $50,000 out of the family estate because he was able to prove that he was a natural born child of hers. Naturally, anyone who is dependent on their looks as part of their identity, she did have some issues with that. And as age started to take its toll, she started going to plastic surgeons, having work done. That work ended up causing disfigurements and other issues. She ended up becoming a recluse. She refused to see her family. She was arrested on 2 separate occasions for theft. And one of those times she had $14,000 in her pocket, but took $86 worth of costume jewelry, basically. Neither ended up in a conviction. The federal government never compensated her for her invention. She didn't really pursue it after that. There's a time where the patent runs out and you have a specified amount of time to renew the patent. She didn't know how that process worked, didn't know that was even a requirement. So ended up, she lost all rights to the patent. Ended up dying with just an estate of $3.3 million there in Florida. So that's all I've got for you on those. I hope that was interesting and enlightening. It was a lot of fun for me, especially studying the life of Hedley Lamarr and the different things that she went through and struggles that she faced. A phenomenal woman in all that she did. To see someone that, somebody in the interview said her life of science was derailed by her beauty. And she was a very beautiful woman, but very smart. And although she may not have had all of the tools and technical knowledge to implement the thoughts that came into her mind, she certainly had a mind that was very inventive and very creative. So that's all I have for a presentation tonight. This is KC5 AMT.
Go ahead, Mike. Yeah, her invention was the basis of cellular telephone communications, and it's called multiplexing. And that is the basis of tremendous number of modern devices used today. Computers, like I said, radio, cellular phones, public safety radios use that. So this thing is used all over the world for everything. Mike, I appreciate that. Yeah, it talked about how that technology has transformed the world of Wi-Fi, Bluetooth technology, cell phone technology, missile guidance systems, satellite communications, a lot of things that are able to be done because of, that initial little thought that popped into someone's head and ended up the way it is. It's interesting to see how that works. It was first used in World War II for encryption of Atlantic cable communications.
Well, that was very interesting. Yeah, I've always heard that basically Hedley Lamarr was kind of the pioneer of the original thing for all kinds of frequency hopping and all that and other things. I'm going to turn it back over right now to Todd. This is AF5RS on the W5NGU repeater for one more round of check-ins because we've got some prizes that Kelly's going to give out. Todd?